Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
No.
I thought not. It's not a story the Jedi would tell you. It's an ancient Sith legend. Darth Plagueis was a dark lord of the Sith, so powerful and so wise he could use the Force to influence the midichlorians, create life. He had such knowledge of the dark side. He could even keep the ones he cared about from dying.
He could actually save people from death?
The side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some would consider to be unnatural.
What happened to him?
He became so powerful, the only thing he was afraid of was losing his power, which eventually, of course, he did. Unfortunately, he taught his apprentice everything he knew. Then his apprentice killed him in his sleep. Ironic. He could save others from death, but not himself.
Is it possible to learn this power?
Not from a Jedi.
You are listening to X Wing Radio.
That's right. I'm David, that's Wesley, and this is X-Wing Radio. The only podcast from Galaxy Far away.
All right, as you have already seen by everything pertaining to this video, today we are going to be talking about the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. David, we just, both of us, have read, where'd I put it? Oh, have just read the Plagueis novel. I love this book. I love a lot of the extended universe books. They're just really well written and told, and just an expansion on Star Wars that I don't know. And I don't know about you, but like, I think because Star Wars has had so many bad stories told recently through Disney, and again, that's not what we're going to focus on today. We're not going to focus on Disney Star Wars and bog down on it like we always do. But I think because there's been so many bad stories, to listen to stories that are actually cohesive and well told and thought out is just fun to listen to within the Star Wars universe, personally for me.
Mhm. And this does such a good job of tying into the prequels too. Like a lot of the political stuff that I feel like wasn't necessarily given the spotlight it should have been in the prequels, because
Hmm.
there were so many themes in the prequels that George Lucas had, but the thing with George Lucas is he has so many different ideas, but probably only 30% of them actually make it to the screen.
Yeah.
But the rest of
And
them still
then
influence what made it to the screen.
and half of the ones that did make it to the screen, you actually realize watching it,
Mm.
like on a surface level. Because I mean, I think we talked about it. One reason why we were so high on A Phantom Menace last time when we talked about it on the channel was because I think we were paying attention to a lot of those undertones, specifically the plotting and scheming behind the scenes stuff that Palpatine was doing. And like it's so cool to watch him manipulate everyone. And if you're not watching it, like if you're kind of watching it from a surface level, that's not really what you're seeing as much. um Now, David, I do have a question for you because at one point we talked about this, at least I remember talking about it. You didn't like you had a problem with the Plagueis novel being canon for the simple reason of where it tied in to the prequels. Now, I know specifically it was with Darth Maul, but like I don't know if there's maybe other points that you might have had a problem with. But after having read it, what are your thoughts now? Do you like it being canonized? I mean, obviously, at this point in time, it's not. It's extended universe. It's not canon, but it also there's no there's nothing contradicting it. you could maybe say the Acolyte is, but oh well, who cares? This is better than the Acolyte ever could think of
Mhm.
being. So tell me what you think along those lines. Like, do you like this do you like this being canon?
So overall, I think the story, yes, the story is amazing. Honestly, the Darth Maul thing isn't as big of a deal as I thought it would have been, but
Hmm.
I still think that having Maul having the title of Darth would signify that he should have been a Sith Lord, but it's not really the you know.
Well, and I think one way it can be easily explained away, because I mean they even have that scene with Palpatine and Maul on the rooftops in Coruscant or in the walkway in Coruscant, and Plagueis is watching from a distance, and he's listening to the that part of the movie that we see, and in it, I think in that line. Well, I know at one point is that obviously Plagueis says, or not Plagueis, Maul says it's like, "At last we shall reveal ourselves. At last we shall have revenge," as if he's a Sith. Yada yada yada. Um, so I kind of feel like it's one of those things where you can look at it one of two ways. Either Palpatine, or from Palpatine's point of view, he's already training up his apprentice so that he can overthrow Plagueis, which is a typical Sith thing to do. I mean, Tenebris already
Mm,
did this with Darth Venomous, technically, technically a Darth within that line of thought. Um, Probably, I guess, labeled a Darth by Tenebris. So you got Venomous, yeah. Um, and then you can look at it from Plagueis's point of view as maybe him being okay with him being called Darth Maul because him and Palpatine are supposed to be equals. So the line of Bane, the rule of two is no longer in effect in his mind. So having acolytes, having assassins isn't that big of a deal, you know.
mm.
Obviously, like
Well,
you said, doesn't really matter because it's not that big of a deal, but if you want to explain it away,
also, I feel like the biggest way you could explain it would be that M- Maul thought he was the apprentice.
yeah, that's true.
Maul thought
Correct me.
Palpatine was the man. I don't think Maul knew about Plagueis.
The funny thing is I have listened to this since we discussed talking about this. I listened to the audiobook for it about 4 or 5 times, and I don't necessarily I don't think he does, but I'm sitting here trying to remember if there's a point that he does it. I told Sarah I was listening to it, over and over again, and she asked me if I was trying to memorize it. If I was, I failed. So, but I don't know. I don't think that he ever finds out about Plagueis. I think Maul or Plagueis views Maul in combat, but I don't think he ever actually meets or finds out about Plagueis. So that is true too. From that line of thought, he would have thought he was, the apprentice to the
Also,
master.
Plagueis wanted to be the one in the shadows. So, when like Palpatine revealed himself to um what's his name? The Trade Federation guy.
Oh, Viceroy Gunray.
Yeah, Gunray. Um yeah, when he reveals himself to Gunray, he's supposed to be like he kind of Palpatine kind of reveals himself as the master.
Yeah,
And
the
so
Dark Lord of the Sith.
introducing Maul as his apprentice, if obviously at this point in time, all people really know about the Sith is just from legends, not like
Yeah,
in the real world, Star Wars legends, like actual legends in the Star Wars universe. Um,
yeah, yeah,
so, but still, Rule of Two would have been a very like, a well-known thing for anyone who knows anything about the Sith.
Yeah. Um. Well, to talk about the actual book, where do you want to start? Do you want to start at the beginning or the end? Because technically, the book starts at the end and then goes back to the beginning.
Well, let's start at the real beginning, not the end at the beginning.
Okay. Well, now I'm confused.
So the book starts off on what is that planet? We mentioned it when we were talking about the Acolyte,
Valdemnik or
Valdemnik.
Baldemnik.
Valdemnik, because Plagueis and Tenebris are mining cortosis, and some
Mm-hmm.
apparently they have droids mining cortosis, and there's something wrong in one of their mines, so they have to go to the planet to figure out what's going on. And in that
So
whole
there's a
process,
so yeah. So they're in this cavern or whatever, and they're with the droid they have a droid that's communicating with a mining probe, and
mhm,
then which the probe came from subtext mining, which semi comes into play later. Um, but anyway, so there's a pocket of methane gas in there, highly explosive, combustible, whatever. And so they try to go around it, then find out that there's a lot more pockets around there. The probe won't stop, so they try to hightail it out of there before they die. Kabloom.
well,
Kabloomy.
well, and Tenebris actually does end up dying, but not so
Yes.
accidentally.
Not so accidentally, yeah. So there is an explosion. Tenebris tries to save the ship. Plagueis then sees his opportunity to kill his master, which I do know there was a point where they are having a I don't know what they're barking at, but shoot. I don't know if you can hear that. The dogs are going wild out there. Um anyways, so Plagueis catches Tenebris off guard, and the roof that is caving in, he forces it down on Tenebris, and it crushes him, impales him, like it pierces his lungs, whatever. I don't know their biology. I think it said lung in the thing. So he has a pierced lung. He's dying. Bashed his skull in, and so all this is happening. Question: is that dishonorable? Because I mean, I know at that in that scene, Plagueis says in his thoughts, he's like, the fact that he could do this to Tenebris proved that he was growing old and sluggish. But that being said, though, like obviously I do understand that it's supposed to be whenever the apprentice feels like he has learned all he can from the master and the master is no longer the stronger or superior of the two, is when the apprentice is supposed to kill him. But like,
Mhm.
and I understand also the Sith, while they do have a code of honor, more or less, because, they don't have an actual moral code. They're just more like honors more the thing. I would assume they're bad. It doesn't really matter. Is this a bad way of killing his master? Catching him off guard. Can you shut up, please? I'm getting annoyed. Anyways, what are your thoughts?
I mean, if you're going based off of the honor thing for Sith, it was kind of his duty to, because if like from his point of view at least,
Mm-hmm.
if he was able to kill Tenebris, that means Tenebris is old and weak.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the Sith honor code would be more along the lines of it's more noble to put him out of his misery than let him grow older and weaker.
So you don't think it was a thing where he should have like faced him in a duel, whether it was lightsaber combat or force abilities? Like you don't think that that should have been how he defeated him? I mean, obviously, I understand the Sith are the Sith. This is how it's going to happen. I'm just wondering, like, you know, in the same way that like Palpatine kills Plagueis later on when he's drunk, you know, is it a little dishonorable that he goes like is it kind of like shooting the guy in the back?
Well,
That's
yeah,
my
it is,
thought.
but that's kind of the Sith thing.
I mean, I guess, but I mean like,
It's
okay, well how about this? Is that what Bane would have wanted when he established the Sith rule of two, right? Cuz Bane and Darth is it Darth Zana is his apprentice? I know
I
that
think
is
so,
a
yeah.
Darth at some point. Whoever his apprentice is, he and her fight and they have an actual battle, like lightsabers, force power, like all that stuff.
Mhm.
So, which that's another book that we're gonna have on the list. We are going to talk about
It,
the
it
Darth Bane trilogy.
it's on. I'm not sure if it's on schedule or not, but I was planning on putting it on schedule for sometime next year, probably
It's
starting January,
it's
February,
on
because
the
there's 3 books.
yeah. We have a lot of books to get through, so we'll be
So
reading a lot over the next year.
the Thrawn trilogy we're getting to first, then the next set of books is going to be the Bane trilogy. So stay tuned for
Hmm.
that.
Which
Um,
single books. One of my favorites that I've read is Deceived. It's one of the Old Republic books. Deceived is really good. That goes into Darth crap. Not Darth crap. That's not actually a Sith Lord. Um, he he'd be awful anyways. I mean, he's literally crap. So, anyways, I forget. But back to this. Do you think it's what Bane would have wanted? I don't know if I'm trying to get a yes out of you because I seem to keep prying you about this. I don't know. But anyways,
I don't just from what I know about Darth Bane, I don't think that that's probably what he intended. But then again, I'm not 100% sure because we haven't read the Bane novels yet.
that's true. That's true. Have I? I don't remember nonetheless. I've listened to a lot of audiobooks and I have absorbed less than that. So, anyways, what next, David? What next?
What happens next?
I guess, are we just going through the details of the book?
Um, well, I don't think we should go through every detail of the books. There's some boring political stuff after this. It's actually not boring. It actually
Hmm.
is very interesting. This
It's
book
very
does a very
interesting.
good
Yeah.
job. This book does a very good job of telling a story without much action because most of it is through like political manipulation.
Yeah. Which,
And
I
so
mean,
that's what a lot of that's what a lot of this first part of the book is. But it's
hmm
all leading up to Darth Plagueis as Hugo de Mask, which is his public persona. As Hugo de Mask, basically funding the election campaign for one of the kings of Naboo.
we'll discuss why he's wanting to fund the election.
So yeah, so this basically you have the two candidates. I'm talking about it now like it's a presidential election or whatever, which I guess is fair enough. But so the two candidates, basically, you have one that's an isolationist and one that's wanting to make
Expansionist.
Naboo an expansionist. Yeah, and Plagueis is backing the expansionist because he wants
Hmm.
the Naboo's plasma. He wants that market.
Yeah. So this all like it's really cool because so even at this point in time, the book starts out. At 65 to so okay, roughly about 30 years before the events of what's the name of the movie? Phantom Menace, right? Because the Phantom Menace is about 30. Well, maybe not 30.
Okay, hold
Phantom
up.
Menace about 20 years, so it's about 40 years before the Phantom Menace. Because
Hold up.
Anakin would.
Revenge of the Sith is 19 BBY. Anakin's like 20, 21 in Revenge of the Sith. He's like 9
He's
in Phantom Menace, so I'd say, yeah, 30 years before, or 30 years before the Battle of Yavin.
so this is about 30 years before the events of A New Hope. But it's cool because because this portion of the book takes place about in that time frame. When the book first takes place around 67 to 65 BBY. And you're already seeing Naboo starting to become a player in galactic politics with this, which obviously when he scoots over to dealings with Naboo, Hugo de Mask, when he scoots over to dealing with Naboo, he starts working on the towards getting things with like the free trade federation, the plasma going, setting up things for the blockade on Naboo, which is starting the events of Phantom Menace, and then obviously uh, mentoring a young Palpatine into a senatorship, then later into the chancellorship. So you start to see all those pieces start to fall together, and it's really cool to just watch like, I mean, obviously we've said this over and over and over again. If you haven't read the book, read the book or listen to the book. It's a really, really well told story. And if you've watched the Star Wars movies, it's just really cool to see all of the behind the scenes like just fall together. So obviously he's backing up, you know, the king from Naboo. I'll let you finish your story. Grandpa, tell us a story.
Yeah, so
Have you ever
basically,
heard of the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? I
we've
thought
already done
not. It's
that.
not a story your parents. It's not a story your parents would tell you.
Right. Anyway, um, yeah, Palpatine, Chief Palpatine, which does it even say his first name is Chief
Nope,
in the book?
nope. Because at the okay, so um, when they start talking about Palpatine, because essentially what happens is there's some there's something that comes out about so they're backing this expansionist can uh
Candidate.
candidate. There we go. Aha, same wavelength. Um, so they're backing the expansionist candidate, and something bad comes out about the or some information comes out at some point about something pertaining to the isolationist guy, and they're like, it seems like maybe there's someone on the inside. This is how we're getting the information, and they come to find out it probably is Palpatine. Well, they're talking about him, and they're like, hey, what's his name? Like Hugo Damas is trying to figure out more about this guy, and he says, what's his name? He said, well, just that. His name is Palpatine. Like he no longer goes by his birth given name. I think at one point they even talk about how he resents his family, or he doesn't like his family. He has bad relationship with his father, but he like resents the name that they gave him. So he adopted his household name, Palpatine, but they never mention the fact that his name is Sheev Palpatine in the book.
It,
I
it is kind of
don't.
weird the fact that he resents his family, so he chooses to just go by his family name.
Well, they didn't even talk about that in the book, and right off the top of my head, I can't remember specifically why he's okay doing that. But Plagueis is like, yeah, if you resent your family, why are you going by the family name? I think it's what was it he said? Something along the lines of like he resents his father and his, well, he doesn't really care about his mother. The way he put it with his mom was like, she does whatever his father does, so like she doesn't have a mind of her own, so he doesn't respect her. But like his father is more like he marred the name in his eyes, and so maybe Palpatine's of the opinion that like he like his the family legacy he wants to uphold, even though he thinks his father put it down. I don't know.
Yeah.
Ask him.
So, so basically, the Palpatine family is like an old, rich, like influential family in Naboo.
Well, I
So that's
think
why
at the
he.
one point they mentioned, I think they mentioned at one point that they actually are the royal line. But that nowadays royal or the king is elected as opposed to it being a royal line. So they are technically, I think, Naboo royalty.
Hmm, that makes sense. But anyway, long story short,
Short story
Palpatine's
long.
Palpatine was leaking the information. Plagueis finds out. It's Palpatine, and as Hugo Damask starts to mentor Palpatine,
Hmm.
and eventually coming to the point where Palpatine basically his force wakes up and he murders his entire family.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you need to think about it. Like Palpatine, he talked to Plagueis about it before, and there's points that they mentioned it, but he was strong enough in the Force that from a young age he was even like manipulating his peers and stuff like that, despite the fact that he didn't know what he was doing. Now, Plagueis even talks about doing the same thing in his childhood, how he manipulated his peers growing up, and that eventually, his parents sat him down and said, actually, you know, we expected this. Which that's an interesting thought too. Not to stray too far off topic, but they talk about it in the book, but most Sith, while like the Jedi, they want you at a young age so you don't develop attachments. The more baggage you have coming into becoming a Sith is the better, because that fuels your hatred and rage and all the things a Sith like. So Plagueis is a rarity in the fact that he was taken at a young age. Like he was more or less, from the way it looked, kind of like bred to be a Sith,
Mm.
which is interesting.
Yeah, and that is interesting too, because the whole Jedi thing is trying to be free from emotion, and the whole Sith thing is trying to be basically fueled by emotion.
Hmm.
It does make a very interesting contrast, starting training as a youngling versus as an adult.
Yeah. Which, like, obviously, with the right kind of training, as we see with Maul, being trained from birth is not a bad thing. Maul turned out pretty good as a Sith, or a dark side user, whatever you want to consider him. Um, but yeah. So let's also talk about, before we get too far from the beginning of the book, this thing that everyone is very, very aware of from the line that we introduced this video with, the tragedy of Darth Plagueis, and how he could manipulate. Okay, let's start over. So he could manipulate the midichlorians to create life, save life, yada yada yada. So it's interesting because they hop on that right away in the book. When he kills Tenebris, he watches Tenebris's midichlorians die, which I did also find it interesting. He talked about how the Jedi have to use blood tests to figure out who's force sensitive and how force sensitive they are, whereas he can see it when he looks at an individual, which obviously that makes sense. Like he said, that's how the Sith have found their apprentices over the years. But it's interesting that like that's a level that you can obtain, like actually seeing that
Well,
thing.
I think part of it might have to be the fact that it's probably an ability associated with the dark side. Just because think about how the differences between the way the Jedi view midichlorians and the way Plagueis and the Sith view midichlorians. The Jedi view
Yeah.
midichlorians as a like it's a symbiotic relationship.
hmm
Plagueis views the midichlorians as something to be controlled.
Yeah. Which we need to get into a later point. The midichlorians, the Force, basically say, "Hey, we're not," and obviously we get the chosen one out of that, but we'll dive into that a little bit later. Um, but he starts to watch people die to see how the midichlorians behave. Now, one thing that's interesting is that he when he kills so on Baldimnik, the ship he came on with Tenebris got destroyed, so he had to find another way off the planet, right? The way he got off was he went to the shipping yard there where the spaceport was, and he found a ship and he got out of there. The ship was a cargo ship. They found him on there, saw he was a stowaway, yada 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 stuff like that. He kills them all. So he was thinking in thoughts or whatever, talking about how it's as if the midichlorians for each of the individuals on the ship had already started dying or getting ready to die because they knew like their fates had already been locked in. Now,
Mm.
obviously, I think within Star Wars it's pretty safe to assume that there is destiny and there is fate in Star Wars. Obviously that's how you get like the chosen one and stuff like that. Um, you know, Originally Star Wars was supposed to be told from the standpoint of the Wills, which I guess you can still say it is. But like higher beings basically
Mm.
that kind of can control things. So like, you know, but that's also an interesting aspect that it kind of uh brings in is like, can you really create life? Can you really save life if it's all fate and destiny? Like, you know, could Anakin, if he had known this power, have ever saved Padme because it was Padme's destiny to die? Because otherwise, Anakin may have never defeated Palpatine, possibly. You know?
Yeah, I mean it is an interesting thing to talk about. So like okay, we've kind of been jumping around this topic, so I'll just go ahead and say it. But so Plagueis' experiments with the Force and life and midichlorians, basically he was manipulating the Force too much. So in his words, the Force kicked back and created Anakin
hmm
as a result of what the fact that Plagueis was trying to manipulate life. The Force
Yeah.
created the Chosen One to get rid of the Sith. But at the same point, you could say, if you're talking about destiny and fate and all this stuff, the Force only let Plagueis control it so that it could kick.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair to
to
say.
such a point. You know,
Yeah.
obviously
Well,
obviously, there's a difference between like you know Sidious using Force Lightning and Plagueis, you know, killing Venomous and bringing him back from the dead over and over and over again. There's
yeah.
a difference between that.
Well, well, okay, because like, and not again to stray off too off a topic, but like, Star Wars Theory has done a couple different like what if, and I'm sure other YouTubers have done it as well, but I've listened to more of his. And there's a couple ones of like, what if Anakin never turned to the dark side? What if he never, this, that, the other thing? And a lot of them take place while he's on Mustafar, right before, he chokes out Padme and then, fights Obi-Wan. And the one thing that I'm like, oh, it's a very optimistic look on it is usually after everything happens, the final battle is Anakin, Obi-Wan, Yoda against Plagueis. Not Plagueis, Palpatine. Gotta remember who I'm talking about here. Um, and they're pretty well outmatched, despite the fact that Yoda and Palpatine are pretty well even. But anyways, the way it's, usually seen is they're kind of outmatched. Um, but then all of a sudden, for some reason, it's kind of like Anakin goes Super Saiyan, he just like unlocks his true potential and then he just like can kill Palpatine. And like I don't know, like that's okay if that's obviously I think he probably knows more about Star Wars than, either one of us do because he's read more and seen more stuff. But from what I know of Star Wars, like I don't think that that's necessarily how it happened. It's an optimistic look on it. But I think at that point in time, Yoda Yoda would go after Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan's the weakest of those. Kill Obi-Wan, kill Anakin, and then probably go after Yoda and either kill Yoda or have Yoda go into hiding. I don't think that Anakin at that point in time was powerful enough to take on the Emperor. And I don't think that there's a way for him to go Super Saiyan, unlock his true power. So I'm saying, like, I don't think that there's a way if Padme doesn't die that he is able to fulfill his destiny as the chosen one. That was a very roundabout way of going about that statement. But, I'm just saying like, within destiny, I don't think that there was a way for him to save that life. So like you said, Plagueis manipulated the midichlorians. He brought Venomous back to life and killed him off as much as the Force allowed him to.
Mhm. You know, and that's it is kind of interesting to think about Star Wars in that kind of like predestiny predestination kind
Yeah.
of view, but it's kind of interesting to think of it that way. But
Well, when
yeah,
you think about it, from a more cinematic uh view, it is all predestiny because the writers are the ones that determine it. But even in the
mm,
universe, there is a lot of elements that would kind of point towards people not having the ability to choose their own fate, more or less.
mm,
But diving back into the book probably should happen sooner rather than later.
yeah. So where were we?
Plagueis is mentoring Palpatine.
Yeah, so Palpatine ends up basically Palpatine's father is trying to doesn't like the fact that Hugo the Mask is mentoring Palpatine,
Mm-hmm.
so he tries to basically force him to go into hiding so Hugo the Mask can't find him, and essentially kidnaps him and is taking him to some planet from to stay with people they know.
Oh, you're talking
And
about when he
Palpatine,
when he pulls when he pulls Palpatine out of school? Is that what you're talking about?
yeah, yeah,
Okay, okay.
and Palpatine ends up killing, well, first his father and then the rest of his family.
Yeah, he gets into an argument and then kills them all. And
Using
then
the
he calls
Force.
Plagueis. Yeah, then he calls Plagueis, and he's like, "Hey, haha, so I killed them all. Um, I know you told me a story about how you killed all of your brothers and sisters, to get your father's fortune because you were the estranged child or whatever. And so he's like, "Can you come get me? Like, I'm kind of in a predicament here. Can you come get me? Like, here's my coordinates." And he's like, "All right, cool." And then he finally comes get him, like I think a week later or so, maybe 2 weeks later. And he's like, "What are you doing?" And it probably was just, obviously more manipulation on Plagueis' part. But then after that, um, Palpatine kind of goes on to they kind of skip a little bit. I think from there he jumps to where he's started his political career. I don't know if he's the senator yet, but I think he is starting to. He's a young politician at that point. Do you remember?
Mm. So before he's elected to the Senate, he's like some kind of ambassador to the.
Ah, yes.
He's basically an ambassador to the Republic from Naboo.
Hmm.
So he works
Yeah.
alongside the um the current senator from Naboo and stuff, but
Isn't
he's
that
not actually in the
Vidar
Senate.
Kim? That's Vidar Kim, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So yeah, so right now he's kind of learning the ropes, getting everything. Um, and then our first little look at a lot of Plagueis's manipulation and him getting Palpatine to start to do some dirty work is the assassination of Vidar Kim, which I believe that is who his mentor is when he was at university. When Plagueis first meets him, I believe Vidar Kim was the mentor that he had. So he has been with him for a while. He's kind of the father that Palpatine never had.
He's
And
actually been
Plagueis
more
tells,
been and he's actually been a mentor to Palpatine longer than Plagueis has
yeah,
at this
and
point.
Plagueis says he's in the way. Also, attachments. Let's get some anger fueled out and whatever. He's like, kill him. So uh, Palpatine orders the assassination of Vidar Kim. It succeeds, but there's a slight problem with it because I don't know what they're barking at. This is getting a little annoying. But there's a slight mistake because Vidar Kim has a son in the a Jedi, and he goes to him. They're out together when the assassination attempt happens, and the Jedi think that maybe the assassination attempt was on him instead of the senator.
Mm.
So
I
the
don't know
other
why.
day, this
I don't know
this is
why the
kind of
Jedi
random.
would. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to look up to make sure Vidar Kim was actually the right guy, because so the other week we were talking about the Acolyte, right? And we were talking about the characters in it. And we were talking about the green lady. I think her name is Venestra, but
Hmm.
we were calling her something else. And we called her that a couple times, and I was sitting there, I was like, now I know I'm wrong in saying that, but like I can't do anything about it. So I wanted to fact check myself before I just started saying the wrong name like 50 times. Um Vidar Kim was a male human politician from the planet Naboo. Kim served as a senator in the anyways, in the 50 BBY. tutoring a young noble boy named Palpatine. So we are correct on this one.
That's good to be correct, because honestly, there are so many names in this book. I cannot, like, reading it or well, listening to it. Um, I do have it. I did read some of it,
Yeah,
most of the book I listened to. But listening to it, there were several points where like it would bring a character back in who hadn't been in it for a while, and it was like, wait, who is this again? I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this is that person, yeah, because
a
there's
lot
so
of
many
what
names.
I did for it was I had to look up the species that the people were. Um specifically with the will be gone. When Plagueis is trying to get off Baldemnik, the crew of the will be gone. I looked up a bunch of their species because when you're listening to it, it goes over it so fast, and you're a little
Mm,
confused as to what's going on. Which one of them was a Kaleesh, one of Grievous's species. So I found that to be interesting. Um, but anyway, so like yeah, I agree. There are a lot of names, a lot of people in this book. Um, just and some of them obviously are some that we've heard before. Plagueis, we've heard Palpatine. Later on we have Dooku, Qui-Gon Jinn,
Chancellor
uh,
Valorum, Padme.
Valorum. We have Padme's in it. Yes, I was about to say wait, Padme's in it, but yeah, we have young Padme in this. We also have crap, what's his name? Um, Sifo Dyas. That's what I was looking for. We have Sifo
Mm.
Dyas, which is a character
Well,
we've
also, of
heard of
course,
before.
Gardula the Hutt and Jabba the Hutt are in it too.
Yeah,
Um,
we do have the Huts. Um,
yeah.
we have crap, there's another one. They at one point mention with the heightened security, they mention the security guard from Phantom Menace. What's his name?
Oh, crap.
I'm thinking
No, it's not. It's another name.
all this coming to mind. Yeah, it's not crap. But all that's coming to mind is Phasma, and I know who that is. Um
No, but also they several times throughout the book he name drops. More talking about the political families, but still name drops like the Antilles family from Alderaan. Well, also he mentions
yes.
Bail Antilles. Um,
Yeah, when they're doing the center of it, because I mean, in Phantom Menace, they say they mention Bale and Talese, and they mention the other guy who's running against it, but they mention those in the book too.
yeah, and
Is
they also
Organa
mentioned the.
mentioned in this?
I
Bail
don't
Organa?
think so.
I don't know if
I don't think
I
so.
remember hearing him.
But they also mentioned that, of course, the Tarkin family, and even before Chancellor Valorum's in it, they mentioned the Valorum family too. So
Yes, yes. Well, I mean, the Valorum family had been in a chancellor in the chancellorship for generations, so
yeah,
um, but apparently not the greatest of them.
yeah.
All right, David, keep telling the story while I look up who this captain is, because I'm kicking myself right now. Wait, wait, wait. No, that's Jar Jar
It's
Binks.
on it's on the tip of my tongue. I can't remember who it is though. Where are we?
Panaka.
Naka. Yeah, yeah. There you go. Yeah. So yeah. Palpatine kills his family. Tells Hugo to Mask about it. Hugo to Mask reveals that he's actually Darth Plagueis, and basically recruits Palpatine as his Sith apprentice, as Darth Sidious.
And they do
And
some
then
training. They have a couple training
there's
scenes.
there's like a 20-year. There is some of the training mentioned, but there's all it kind of glosses over like a whole 20-year period where Palpatine is going through like rigorous training.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think Plagueis even mentions something about the fact like this training is going to like carry you. apart and then rebuild you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which it's also interesting, like he does a lot of training, obviously right off the bat when he's learning from Plagueis, but then like later on in the book, and who knows how long before we catch up with them, but Palpatine is doing a lot of his own training. Like him and
Mm,
Plagueis are separated, not really seeing each other a whole lot, communicating vaguely, but like they're doing their own thing, and Palpatine's training on the side and stuff like that. Like that's part of why Palpatine becomes so powerful is because of the studies and training that he does. Like he masters so much, you know, because he just trains. If you want to
mm,
be the ruler of the world, keep training. Train on what? You got to figure that out yourself. But just keep training. You could be the best Mario Kart player in the world, and maybe you'll rule it one day. Who knows? Keep training.
rule Mario Kart or rule the world?
Exactly.
Mm. Anyway, so that's pretty much like the first half of the book,
Yeah.
more or
Which is
less.
interesting. Which is interesting. So, and I don't know if you found this in listening to it or reading through it, but like, this is the Plagueis novel, but only the first half of the book really focuses on Plagueis. The
Mm,
second half focuses mostly on Palpatine and like him working his way to where we find him in the Phantom Menace, and then even past that, because so the beginning and the end of this book take place when he kills Plagueis. When he
mm,
kills Plagueis is after he becomes Chancellor. In that, he's even talking about. I mean, he obviously gives his election speech, but like they talk about how he kills Plagueis, and then like not too long after that, he's going to Naboo to celebrate and
mm,
congratulate everyone. Like it's like he kills Plagueis at the end of Phantom Menace.
mm.
The movie's over. So I don't know if it explicitly says it. I don't remember it saying it, but like Plagueis and Maul kind of die at the same time.
Yeah.
Not really, but kind. That's it. It's around the same time. Now I do have a question for you, David. Again, we'll get back to the story in a second. So when Plagueis killed Tenebris, he felt a strong presence in the Force. When Palpatine killed Plagueis killed Tenebris, he felt when Palpatine killed Plagueis, he felt a strong presence in the Force. Plagueis thought that what he felt might have been Tenebris after having felt him.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on the matter? Would what Plagueis felt, could it have been Palpatine? Because Palpatine would have been alive at that point. And could have what Palpatine felt been Anakin?
That is interesting because so I don't know that necessarily the Sith. Let's say the Sith afterlife because the Jedi obviously have they become Force ghosts. They become one with the Force
Yeah.
basically. I don't know if the how necessarily the Sith way of that works. Obviously, we've never seen a Sith ghost
Mm-hmm.
in Star Wars. There might be in some secluded legends something. There might be a Sith ghost, but the closest thing we've get seen to that is holocrons.
Yeah. Well, obviously, you do have when Sith would possess items or like possess a tomb. So you go to the
Mm,
tomb and the Sith would be there. So you do have stuff like that. it's less Force Ghost and more like them attaching themselves to the material realm
It,
kind of
it's
a
it's
deal.
almost more like, instead of being like an actual like Force Ghost, it's almost more like a Horcrux.
Yeah, yeah, I was gonna about to mention that. For all
Yeah,
our for all our what do we call them? Potheads.
not hints.
Yeah. I hope Maggie listens to the podcast regularly enough to be able to hear that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So I don't necessarily think, because he wonders, or Plagueis wonders if it is Tenebrous, but that is interesting because I hadn't thought about it being Palpatine and what Palpatine feels being Anakin.
Yeah.
And to that point, if that was the case, if that were the case, would that mean that the dark side already chose its next Sith Lord?
Hmm. That's actually a very interesting thought that I kind of like.
One Sith Lord dies, so the dark side automatically chooses its next Sith Lord.
Yeah.
That is an interesting thought. Anyway, we're closing in on an hour here, so I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of
Yeah, so
just
I just wanted to read
quickly
this.
wrap up
I was
this.
trying to
Go ahead,
sorry, I
go
was
ahead.
trying to sorry. I wanted to read this. My thing's out of focus. Let me get this thing back in focus. Okay. So, yeah, so this is where it is. It says, his spirit soared, but briefly. Something had shaded his sense of triumph, a vague awareness of a power greater than himself. Was it Plagueis reaching out from the far side of death to vex him, or was the feeling a mere coincident consequence of big words? Apotheosis? Mm. Outside, the summits of the tallest buildings were glided guiled by the first rays of the daylight. Um, Another thought that just crossed my mind before we finish the story: could it be the Force itself, essentially giving them this like kind of like a chill down your spine, in a sense of like, hey, you might be powerful, but I have the final say. Like, could it be something along
Mhm,
those lines, possibly, where like, you know, the Force is like, you can do what you want for a time, but I'm going to balance myself.
mhm.
Just a thought. But continue.
So, yeah, basically, just to quickly wrap up the story, after the assassination of I know we just mentioned his name. What's his name?
By Dark Him.
Badar Kim. Palpatine gets elected to Senate. There's several other things. Basically, this portion of the book basically is just setting up the Sith Grand Plan, setting up
Hmm. Which
the prequels.
go over what the Sith Grand or what Plagueis's plan is at this point. We'll dive into what
So
actually happens, but Plagueis has a specific plan at this point.
yeah, so essentially, Plagueis's plan. So at this point, Plagueis. So the Empire was Palpatine's idea.
Hmm.
Plagueis's idea for ruling the galaxy was for Palpatine to get elected as Supreme Chancellor, and then appoint Hugo de Mask as co-chancellor.
Hmm. Assistant to the Chancellor.
Essentially, they would. essentially pulling a Rome and having two emperors, even though
Yeah,
it wasn't
and
empires, but
and
still.
it was kind of a thing of like Plagueis was going to kind of coach from behind the scenes, and Palpatine was going to be the face.
Yep.
Um, Now obviously we all know the events of Phantom Menace. With everything that happened with Naboo, they talk a little bit about the behind the scenes of all of that, where with the Trade Federation, the blockade, and all the events that happen with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn. Then they find Anakin, all these different things. So we all know those events, and those events are seen in a different light in this book because it's from Palpatine and Plagueis' view, whereas in the movie we're seeing it from like Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's view. Um. So, anyways, um, there's a point in the book where um Plagueis Hugo Damask is attending a event, and at the event, he there are some assassins there that try to kill everyone, and he gets his face like sliced. Pretty nasty cut. Not really a cut, more like a
Um, you say
cut off.
you say that he pretty much almost
Lost
loses his
his
lower jaw. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a pretty nasty cut. Shoo, right through the
yeah.
anyways. Um so he kind of escapes with his life more or less. Now I wonder, so there's a long time between this event, because there's another time jump, I believe, between this event and the end of the book. Do you think
Well,
at this point Plagueis is starting to slip with his power? Because even at the end of the book, Palpatine questions if he could have killed Plagueis if he wasn't drunk.
so I think it, in my opinion, I think it almost becomes kind of the Wolverine thing of Plagueis's injuries. He's still kind of using because he's on a basically a respirator after the
Hmm.
assassination attempt. I wonder if he almost is also trying to also using some of his dark side to keep himself healthy.
Yeah.
So kind of like how the Wolverine by the Wolverine thing. I mean, like how Wolverine's healing factor is constantly healing himself from adamantium poisoning, and if he didn't have the adamantium skeleton, his healing factor would actually be stronger.
Or like
Actually,
Deadpool,
actually,
where
actually, Deadpool has a similar thing. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, the cancer's constantly killing him, but his body's regenerating as fast as it's killing him. Yeah, so that's an interesting. Yeah. Well, like that even being said too, when Plagueis does eventually die, how much of his death is due to arrogance on his part for kind of letting Palpatine getting him to that door and thinking to himself, I can keep myself from dying, and then failing to do so. Because it's like he starts to choke, he gets the force choke on Plagueis, and like Plagueis kind of doesn't fight back at first because that's Palpatine says, like he's trying to keep himself alive through his manipulation of the midichlorians as opposed to actually fighting back.
Mm.
I wonder if Plagueis would have succeeded if he wasn't drunk. I wonder how much him being drunk actually had anything to do with anything. Um, but nonetheless, I guess to wrap up the story, Plagueis dies in the end. It's a Plagueis novel, but he dies. Um, and one interesting thing is they do set up a lot of Count Dooku in this book too,
Hmm.
and the development of the clone army. So that is one thing you mentioned. You mentioned how the Empire was Palpatine's plan, which it was, but it was a plan that him and Plagueis were going to do together, because they had already started talks of cloning, and they had already started talks of the Trade Federation and all those other, basically starting to form the CIS, and them starting to develop the droid army. Obviously,
Mm.
they do develop it to some point because we see them in a Phantom Menace, but um, you know, we do see them start to manipulate the galaxy into a war, and then obviously through that they were planning on kind of reshaping the Republic.
Mhm. Yeah, it's definitely interesting seeing it from that point of view, and seeing
Hmm.
how long it took for a plan to actually come to fruition. Even though
Yeah.
it wasn't even
Uh
Plagueis' plan that came to fruition, it was Palpatine's plan. But
yeah. Now another thing I want to mention with this is too, they talk about essentially the inhibitor chips with the clones, because they mention the fact that they need the clones to turn on the Jedi,
which
but they talk about that need to be a really closely guarded secret too.
which is interesting too, because the whole time I was reading this, I kept having to remind myself that this book was published shortly before the Disney acquisition of Star Wars. I think
Mm-hmm.
it was 2011 when the book was published,
So 11 or 12, somewhere in there. Yeah, yeah.
and the
I believe.
Disney buying Star Wars was turned 12.
Yeah.
So
Um. Hmm.
that being said, like you've got obviously from the author watched season 5 of Clone Wars because that's the whole thing with the inhibitor chips.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, you also have the Savage Press stuff, hinting at that, and Mother Talzin, all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Um. But yeah, I find it very cool to see Star Wars from this angle. Um. And like, obviously when you're watching the movies, you can still marvel at the plan that Palpatine does, where essentially he does nothing wrong. From the public standpoint, he does nothing wrong. The Jedi turn on him, which is what he wanted so that he could destroy the Jedi. Like,
Mm.
it's a brilliant plan,
He
enacted
basically
perfectly.
he
And
basically made the Jedi destroy themselves.
yeah, and it's it plays out beautifully. Like, it's a master plan that is so good. Like, I mean, it's an amazing plan. Obviously, we see what happens later on down the line, but like, the Emperor won,
Hmm.
and he was literally one split second away from probably an eternal domination. Now, that being said, the Force does always correct itself. Even Darth Vitiate, I believe is who I'm thinking of. I think he was the emperor that ruled for like 3,000 years or something like that
Hmm.
over the Sith Empire.
Sounds right.
Um, he even got, obviously, he got his comeuppance at some point.
Hmm.
So, obviously it's going to happen, but the emperor could have ruled for a lot longer than he did. But he let his guard down because he was so focused on Luke, which I find ironic. Ironic. Um, but because in that one scene where Plagueis is telling Palpatine about his first assassination and how he choked the guy, and he
Hmm.
shows Palpatine by choking him, and at that moment Palpatine says, "I'm never gonna let my guard down." He never does until He's so focused on Luke that Anakin is able to throw him over the ledge.
Now, here's the question about that. I know we're jumping around
Mhm.
here, but with Palpatine, his plan in Return of the Jedi, what exactly do you think his plan was in Return of the Jedi for Luke?
Probably to take Anakin's spot.
Yeah, because Anakin had failed.
Hmm.
He was weak, or well, weaker than he could have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, if Luke, son of the Chosen One, had a very similar um, potential to Anakin.
But let's talk about this though. Why would Palpatine want a stronger apprentice? Because at that point, I don't think he was following the Sith rule of two anymore. Up until the point of he kept Vader around because he was useful, but he wasn't planning on dying,
Hmm.
right? I mean, obviously it was for punishment, but like he could have given Vader cybernetics that would have actually been good for him. That wouldn't have been as painful, wouldn't have been, as clunky as these are old cybernetics that he was using, and that was a purposeful thing on Palpatine's part.
Hmm.
So if he wanted to, he could probably have made Anakin a little bit better. Probably never to the point of Palpatine, but a little bit better. I mean, he couldn't even lift his arms over his head. I mean, obviously there's some restraint here that Palpatine is putting on Anakin. So if he's doing that to Anakin, if it's strictly for punishment, then that's fine. That's, whatever. But did Palpatine want Luke to overthrow him at some point? I would have thought Palpatine would have wanted to rule forever.
I think it'd probably be more likely that Palpatine's plan would be to basically transfer his essence into Luke.
Fair enough. That's actually probably I hadn't thought of that. That's probably very true.
Once his well, think about this too. Palpatine at this point was like 90 years old
Hmm.
in Return of the Jedi. Palpatine's like 90 because he's
Wasn't he
60
born
in
in?
he's
Go
in
ahead.
his 60s in Revenge of the Sith. And then it's another like 25 years till Return of the Jedi. So he's like almost 90.
So this is well, because I saw this earlier, so I don't know if this is canon or if this is legends, but apparently he was born in 84 BBY, which would have made him a bit older than that.
No, that would be right because 84 BBY, five
Well,
year
then 20 and yeah,
5 year Galactic Civil War. Yeah, that would have put him
yeah, yeah,
at
yeah.
89.
Trying to see if on the canon
So
side, that was just a quick Google search, but I'm trying to see if maybe they say when he
so
was
so I said Palps at this
84
point.
BBY. Yeah.
I said Palps at this point is almost 90. I'm just gonna round it and say he's 90. Even if he has all the Sith science and stuff, would you really want to live like much past that in an old man's body?
Well,
Because
help me with help.
he never like he wasn't really trying to de-age himself. He might have been prolonging his life, but he never made any visible efforts to de-age himself. So
Yeah,
maybe having a young apprentice he could transfer his essence into was his plan.
yeah, and that's another thing too is that we talked about this the other week, where in this book when Plagueis kills Tenebris, he says he doesn't have to worry about essence transfer. Palpatine rediscovers the essence transfer ability,
Mhm. Well, 'cause that's
which he
that's even
does.
I know, bringing in the sequels is almost heresy, but that's what he was trying to do in the sequels with
Well,
Rey.
you don't even have to bring in the sequels with that because that's part of the books and comics from the expanded universe.
Yeah,
They just butchered it in the sequels. So,
yeah,
but
yeah.
that is an actual thing that they did. So, he rediscovered how essence transfer worked. That's another thing too, is like how many other abilities did Palpatine learn that Plagueis and it had been lost to Sith of old.
Mhm.
But I'm pretty sure, and help me remember this if you remember differently, and if I'm speaking out of context or whatever, if I'm wrong, comments. If someone has made it this far into the video, tell me. Um, but I believe Darth Vitiate even was in the same body. Now, obviously, his body had been formed differently, or yada yada yada, because he had lived for so long, and using the Force, he allowed himself to live so long. But like, I'm pretty sure. I mean, he was a human, and he lived for a good long time.
Mhm. And then who was the I don't think it's Darth Vitiate. Who was the Sith that like couldn't die because his hatred was too strong?
I know you're talking about. Let's see if I can remember who that is.
He basically
Um,
became pretty much a walking corpse because
zombie.
yeah, well, not necessarily a
Yeah.
zombie because he was like
Um,
still conscious, but yeah, it's
let's
like the
see. And
it's like in
I,
Mar it's like in Marvel the few times that like Juggernaut's actually gone on like a rampage because the whole power thing with Juggernaut is that he can't die even if his he's in like unstoppable force or whatever. There's a whole
mhm.
thing with like he made a deal with the demon or whatever. Anyway, there's a whole thing with that. But
Uh,
that's actually that's
the
actually interesting.
Sith, the
Go
Sith
ahead.
you're looking for is Darth Sion, and
That's right.
Him and Darth Nihilus were together, um,
Okay.
doing stuff. I
Okay.
think he was the apprentice, more or less, to Nihilus.
Okay. But yeah, like I said, it reminds me of the Juggernaut because, like I said, essentially comic stuff. The Juggernaut can basically have like there's several points in the comics where he basically is just a skeleton fighting because all of his like he goes through so much stuff that all of his like flesh is like ripped from his body, but he's still an unstoppable force, so he can't die.
Huh.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. That's an
Marvel
interesting. The
comics.
Juggernaut.
Marvel
Hmm?
comics are interesting.
Yeah, yeah, they are very interesting. Um, but so I did pull up Darth Vitiate, which that's not. I don't think the one that I was actually looking for because when I looked at it, it wasn't right. Um, let's go back at this. Okay. Um, huh? Who am I looking at? Let's see. Um, no, just pull up the. You got to be stupid, David. You have got to be stupid.
I mean, I think I think we've already established that.
I mean, yeah,
I
but
think this whole podcast is basically just us being stupid.
yeah, yeah. but I think that's the kind of the point of this, David. Like, we're just here to express our stupid for the world to see. Why we want to do that, I have no idea, but
Mm-hmm.
no one
I
said we were
mean,
the brightest.
apparently this is supposed to be funny, entertaining.
Well, at the very least, we can try and pretend it's educational, informative of sorts.
I feel like funny and entertaining is more believable.
Yeah, we're working on it. David, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the Plagueis novel?
Um, Probably an 8 or a 9 out of 10. Probably a 9.
I'd have to I'd have to agree with that.
You know, I think there are better stories, but it's a really good story still.
hmm Um, definitely would recommend if you have not read it or listened to it, go check it out. It's really, really good. Obviously, if you're keeping up with anything new in Star Wars, Plagueis has just been introduced through the Acolyte. So whether you like that story or not, I promise you, you're gonna want to check out Plagueis in more depth. Um, because he's a really cool character, and you know, there's just a lot to it that's really cool. I will say, if you do read the book and you like it, be prepared to really hate what's probably going to happen with Disney Star Wars if they continue to touch uh the Republic era. What's it called? The High
All
Republic
the
era,
High Republic era,
right
yeah.
before Phantom Menace, because they probably are gonna, if they get an Acolyte season 2, we're probably gonna get a version of Plagueis that is not gonna stay true to the book, and I definitely will hate. So, but that being said, still check it out. It's very good. On a scale of carrots to apples, I would probably rate it at a C. So, you know, I think that's pretty good. That's pretty
I,
good.
I would probably say it's an orange, not the fruit, the color, but
Okay,
yeah,
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. The fruit's on the other end, so yeah,
yeah,
you'd want the color. You want the color.
yeah,
Potatoes to apples, it's probably a banana. So,
yeah. I'd probably
yeah,
say it's yeah, definitely yeah. On a scale of 7 to apples, it's blue.
pretty blue. So, hey, I think we're pretty well wrapped up with all of this. Anyone who's still around, thank you for listening to the entire podcast. Please, if you've made it this far, if you're driving, don't do it now, but at some point, leave a like on the video, leave a comment for something. Just say something. I don't care. Say hi. Just comment down. Just say hi below. Anyways, um, but just leave a like, comment. If you're not subscribed to the channel and you enjoyed this, go ahead, subscribe. It's free. Doesn't cost you a thing. So that's what free means. And with that, we will be back next week on X Wing Radio. So be sure to check us out.
And if you're also listening on Spotify, give us a follow and rate 5 stars.
Yes, 5 stars. I forget about that because most people do. So, anyways,
It's also different on every platform, so
whatever it is, give us a thumbs up. Anyways, we'll see you next week and we'll talk more at you. So, bye. Have fun.
uh,
Enjoy your week. Drive safe.